Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to my channel. Welcome to my channel. Right here on YouTube. So, I'm Shirley. Welcome to my channel. So, I have 3 channels here on YouTube. So, I just started. And I'm working on building great content. I want to bring you great content. I want to do some blogging and just so many possibilities for my channel. So I'm not going to stay in the box and say, hey, well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that on my channel. But first and foremost, I will be bringing you, information, knowledge. Information is powerful, knowledge is powerful. So I do want to bring some information on slavery, different philosophers, different ancient philosophers in our history, some law terms, even some new law terms that I might, not have heard of or might not know the meaning. I want to look into that. I want to bring some of those terms to my channel. And I just want to bring anything, that can teach somebody something, anything that, we all can learn from. I just want to bring all that to my channel. So I stopped on, my last video, I was talking about Rosa Parks and slavery and the abolitionists. So the abolitionists, they formed their little groups and they had their little meetings and they wanted to abolish slavery, so they were anti-slavery. So I want to finish where I left off because I talked about Frederick Douglass, Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman. So those were the abolitionists, and I think it was, according to my research today, it's five American abolitionists who fought to end slavery. So I talked about Frederick Douglass, but I'll mention him again. But we do have Frederick Douglass. We have Harriet Beecher Stowe, because I didn't talk about her yesterday. And then we have Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, and John Brown. So let's start with Frederick Douglass. So these are the 5 abolitionists who fought to end slavery. Throughout history, many people throughout history have fought for the eradication of slavery. We've heard of and studied many of these brave men and women in our history classes. Maybe you grew up having dinner conversations about those who sought to end slavery. Maybe you are having those exact conversations with your children now. So yeah, it's good to talk about slavery to your children now, because but they should be learning it in school. Depending on their age, they should have already learned it. Depending on their age and the grade that they are in. So I know that none of my grandchildren or my children there, they did tell me that they did learn it in school, but my grandchildren, they are very young, so I don't think they would be learning about it right now. So it says, maybe you are having those exact conversations with your children now because you know that slavery is still, to this day, a prevalent problem. So I'm not going to get into that on this video, but they say slavery is still a prevalent problem. Whatever the case may be, chances are that you have heard of some or all of the people on our list of famous abolitionists in history. So we have Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was born into slavery in Maryland. So he was born in not too far from where I live, Maryland. Born into slavery in Maryland in 1800s. And he went on to become the first American citizen to hold a high position within the U.S. government. When Douglass was sold, the wife of his owner taught Douglass the alphabet despite the ban on teaching slaves to read and write. Douglass's ability to read refined his political views and human rights ideology and gave him the impetus to do something about it. So in other words, they said his wife, when he was sold, the wife of his owner taught Douglas the alphabet, despite the ban on teaching slaves, so the wife of his owner. So I thought I was just about to say that his owner did that, but I figured that couldn't be, it couldn't be right. Said the wife of his owner. So imagine the wife of his owner taught him the alphabet, and then he took it from there. See, once you learn your alphabets and you put them letters together to form those single words, that's how they start. That's how we started out when we first, when you go to pre-K, you go to kindergarten, or even you go to, some people start at daycare. So once you start learning those alphabets, you put them in those single words, and then you start that sentence structure, and you're on your way. So it says they gave him the impetus to do something about it. So in other words, she taught him, the owner's wife taught him the alphabet, and then he took it from there. And then we have, so once he took it from there, then he started, in my other research, my other research that I presented yesterday, I believe it was yesterday. Yeah, I said that he, once he learned his alphabet, he learned the words, he started putting it in his sentences. Then he started going around town speaking. So once he started going around town speaking, then his British supporters paid for his passage, paid for his freedom. So that was Frederick Douglass. Now we have Harriet Beecher Stowe. Harriet Beecher Stowe was one of 13 children born in a family that were for unanimity, a lot of these pop-ups. Unanimity cared about social justice. She wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. Yeah, I remember that. I always said I wanted to get that book too. So Harriet Beecher Stowe, she wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, a novel that conveyed the harsh reality of African American slaves in the United States. Some of you say that this book contributed to the start of the Civil War. So she probably in that book told it like it was, slavery was harsh. The harsh reality of African American slaves in the United States. Now when I think about it, I'm like, I can't even really believe it happened, but when you think about it as as you get older, you're like, wow, did the United States really let that happen? Some even say that this book contributed to the start of the Civil War. Not only was Stowe's book important, said Harriet Beecher Stowe, not only was Harriet Beecher Stowe's book important as a narrative to the abolition movement, but it also helped pave the way for women in public affairs. And then we have Sojourner Truth. Sojourner Truth was born into slavery in New York and became an important voice in the fight for racial and gender equality. Truth escaped slavery in 1827 and may be best known for her speech, Ain't I a Woman? I think I covered her yesterday in my presentation. Yeah, Ain't I a Woman? So she went around town speaking. And then she was famous for that speech, Ain't I a Woman? And they gave her a whole lot of flack because she was trying to help with the abolitionist movement. She delivered that at the Ohio Women's Rights Convention in 1851. So then we have John Brown. John Brown helped both freed and escaped slaves find refuge along the route of the Underground Railroad. He also created the League of Gileadites, a group formed to protect black citizens from slave hunters. So they were still going around hunting for slaves, and some of the slaves escaped, some of them, were freed, some of them escaped, and some of them needed help to get to freedom. And then the people, the slaves, after they escaped and they tried to get, to Maryland, Virginia, wherever they were trying to go, and then they still had these people, these masters, still, hunting for slaves. John Brown was executed on December 2nd, 1859, after he was captured during the failed raid on Harper's Ferry. Each of these people might have different stories, but they each have something in common. They care deeply about helping men, women, and children in need. Slavery still exists today, and Rest the Vet Rest of Back Freedom wants to see a world in which it has been eliminated. We are working every day to end slavery. We are working every day to end slavery in Haiti, specifically child slavery. So I'm not going to get into that in this video today. Okay, that's Harriet Beecher Stowe and Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth. So those are the five. Then we have John Brown, Harriet Tubman. Those were the five abolitionists. So let's see what is, let's see what's going on with Dred Scott, the Dred Scott decision. So let's go to Dred Scott. So let's go to Dred Scott. Oh, Dred, excuse me. I'm yawning already. And it's just, it says 6:10 p.m. Okay, Dred Scott. Dred Scott case, decision, definition, and impact on history. Let's see. The Dred Scott case, also known as Dred Scott versus Sanford, was a decade-long fight for freedom by a black enslaved man named Dred Scott. So it was a fight for freedom by a black enslaved man. So he was an enslaved man. The case persisted through several courts and ultimately reached the U.S. Supreme Court, whose decision incensed abolitionists gave momentum to the anti-slavery movement and served as a stepping stone to the Civil War. Who was Dred Scott? Who was Dred Scott? Dred Scott was born into slavery around 1799 in Southampton County, Virginia. In 1818, he moved with his owner, Peter Blow, to Alabama. Then in 1830, he moved to St. Louis, Missouri. Both of them were slave states, where Peter ran a boarding house. So, in other words, if you are a slave and you are in a slave state, you are a slave. After Blow died, Blow was his owner. Dred Scott's owner name was Blow. Peter Blow. So after Blow died in 1832, Army Sergeant Dr. John Emerson purchased Scott and eventually took him to Illinois, a free state, and then to Fort Snelling in Wisconsin Territory, where the Missouri Compromise had outlawed slavery. There, Scott married Harriet Robinson, also enslaved, in a rare civil ceremony. Her owner transferred ownership of Harriet to Emerson. So in other words, he was a slave, but his man, when he was living in a state that recognized slavery, but his master, his owner died. So when his owner died, he moved to the next owner. The next owner he had was Dr. John Emerson. He purchased Dred Scott, and then they moved to a free state. So it eventually took him to Illinois, which was a free state. So I guess he figured, you taking me to Illinois, which is a free state, then I should be free. But they saying that he was a slave. So if you was a slave, he was a slave, and even though they moved him, even though his next owner, John Emerson, purchased him after his first owner passed away. So it said, in other words, eventually it took him to Illinois. It took him to Illinois, which was a free state, and then to Fort Snelling in Wisconsin Territory, where the Missouri Compromise had outlawed slavery. So in other words, the Missouri Compromise, I'll probably talk about that next. They outlawed slavery. That's where he ended up, in Missouri. It says there, Scott married Harriet Robinson. He got married to Harriet Robinson. Dred Scott she was also enslaved too. In a rare civil ceremony, her owner transferred ownership of Harriet to Emerson. In late 1837, Emerson returned to St. Louis, but left Dred and Harriet Scott behind and hired them out. Emerson then moved to Louisiana, a slave state, where he met and married Eliza Irene Sanford in February 1838. Dred Scott soon joined them. It says in October 1838, Emerson and his wife Irene and their enslaved workers returned to Wisconsin. After the Army honorably discharged Emerson in 1842, he and Irene returned to St. Louis with Scott and his family, which now included 2 daughters, but they struggled to find success and soon moved to Iowa. It's unclear if Scott and his family accompanied them or stayed in St. Louis to be hired out. So if they were going to be hired out, they probably was going to be sold again. They were hired out before, as this research mentions. For unknown reasons, Dred and Harriet Scott never tried to run away or sue for freedom while living in or traveling through free states and territories. Dred Scott versus Sanford. In April 1846, Dred and Harriet filed separate lawsuits for freedom in the St. Louis Circuit Court against Irene Emerson based on 2 Missouri statutes. Statutes are the laws of that particular state. One statute allowed any person of any color to sue for wrongful enslavement. The other stated that any person taken to a free territory automatically became free, as I was saying, became free and could not be enslaved upon returning to a slave state. See, the other stated that any person taken to a free territory automatically became free and could not be enslaved upon returning to a slave state. So in other words, if you did, Dred Scott was a slave, they took him to a free state, and so according to the Louisiana, I guess that's Louisiana, St. Louis Circuit Court, according to them, if you take them from a free state where they were free, but then you go back to a state that the state wasn't free, it had slaves there. In other words, they trying to figure out, was he a slave or not. So when you have different courts, I guess, saying different things, So in other words, one court said, you took him to a free state, so he's free. He's free. You took him to a free state, he's free. But you took him out of the free state, then you took him back to a state that, he would not be free. You would think he would not be free. It says, neither Dred nor Harriet Scott could read or write, and they needed both logistical and financial support to plead their case. They received it from their church. Abolitionists and an unlikely source, the Blow family, who had once owned them. Since Dred and Harriet Scott had lived in Illinois and the Wisconsin Territory, both free domains, they hoped they had a persuasive case. When they went to trial on June 30th, 1847, however, the court ruled against them on a technicality and the judge granted a retrial. The Scotts went to trial again in January 1850 and won their freedom. Irene appealed the case to the Missouri Supreme Court, which combined Dred and Harriet's cases and reversed the lower court's decision in 1852, making Dred Scott and his family enslaved again. That's for something else. In November 1853, Scott filed a federal lawsuit with the United States Circuit Court for the District of Missouri. By this time, Irene had transferred Scott and his family to her brother. See, he was a slave, then they took him to a free state, and then took him back to a state that wasn't free, and then they transferred him down to different members of their family. So they had it, they had to go through, the court system 2 times so far. It says by this time, Irene had transferred Scott and his family to her brother. So she figured she'd transfer him down to her brother. By this time, Irene had transferred Scott and his family, because Scott, he had got married, and she transferred his owner transferred Scott and his wife down to her brother, John Sanford, although it was determined later that she retained ownership. On May 15, 1854, the federal court heard Dred Scott versus Sanford. So he's back in court again. Dred Scott versus Sanford, and ruled against Scott, holding him and his family in slavery. In December 1854, Scott appealed his case to the United States Supreme Court, took it to the highest court, Supreme Court. Trial began on February 11, 1856. By this time, the case had gained notoriety, and Scott received support from many abolitionists, including powerful politicians and high-profile attorneys. But on March 6, 1857, in the infamous Dred Scott decision, Scott lost his fight for freedom again. Chief Justice Roger Taney. So Taney became best known for writing the final majority opinion in Dred Scott versus Sanford, which said that all people of African descent, free or enslaved, were not United States citizens and therefore had no right to sue in federal court. So it don't look like he won his case. So then this is a Chief Justice Roger Taney. So he was born into the Southern aristocracy and became the 5th Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. So I guess he's explaining what went down when the case went to the Supreme Court. See, the decision also argued that the Missouri Compromise, the Dred Scott decision. So remember Dred Scott, he was a slave, then he wasn't a slave in a certain state, but when his master owner took him back to a state that wasn't, he wasn't considered a free slave, because he had to be in a free state. But when he was in a free state, he was trying to argue that, hey, I'm in a free state, then I'm free, I'm not a slave. But they like, you're still a slave whether you're in a free state or not. So that's what it seems like they were saying. If you're a slave, you're a slave, no matter where we take you. I think that's it for that one. Okay, it do say Dred Scott wins his freedom. By the time the U.S. Supreme Court handed down this Dred Scott decision, Irene had married her second husband, Calvin Chaffee, a U.S. congressman and abolitionist. Upset upon learning his wife still owned the most infamous slave of the time, he sold Scott and his family to Taylor Blow, the son of Peter Blow, Scott's original owner. So Dred Scott was sold back to his original owners, the son of the original owner. So in other words, they were tossing him back and forth so much. So it says Taylor freed Scott and his family. So he finally got free. Taylor freed. See, so it says upon learning his wife still owned the infamous slave of the time, he sold Scott and his family to Taylor Blow, the son of Peter Blow, Scott's original owner. So Taylor he finally got free. Dred Scott finally got free. Taylor freed Scott and his family on May 26, 1857. Scott found work as a porter in a St. Louis hotel, but didn't live long as a free man. At about 59 years of age, Scott died from tuberculosis on September 17, 1858. And then the Dred Scott decision, then it goes into how it impacted the Civil War. See, the Dred Scott decision outraged the abolitionists who saw the Supreme Court's ruling as a way to stop debate about slavery in the territories. The divide between North and South over slavery grew and culminated in a succession of Southern states from the Union and the creation of the Confederate States of America. The Emancipation Proclamation of September 22, 1862 freed slaves freed enslaved people living in the Confederacy, but it would be another 3 years until Congress passed the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery in the United States. So the 13th Amendment abolished slavery in the United States. So I think we all need to, look over those amendments, look over all of them. So that was the 13th Amendment that abolished slavery. So we had the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press. Second Amendment, we have the right to bear arms. But we all need to study. I need to study, I read the amendments, I think on one of my videos. I read all of them, but we need to, study. We had the Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, search and seizure, without probable cause, Fourth Amendment. Then we had the Fifth Amendment. You don't have to testify against yourself for fear of self-incrimination. We have double jeopardy laws in the Fifth Amendment. So I need to go over those amendments as well. And so that is that. So let me see. Let me talk about Alexander the Great, and let me see where he lies in our history. Alexander the Great. Alexandria, I guess I'm spelling it right. So that was the Dred Scott decision, and that was something else. So he finally ended up a free man. So Alexander the Great, let's see where he, the importance of him. I want to go back and see if there's any quotes for Dred Scott. Okay, Alexander the Great, also known as Alexander the Third or Alexander of Macedonia. He died June 13th, 323 BCE, Babylon. Okay, let me see. He was born in 356 BCE at Pella in Macedonia, the son of Philip II and Olympias, the daughter of King Neoptolemus of Epirus. It's some, these names that, I don't even know if some of these names are in the dictionary. Oh, wow. From age 13 to 16, he was taught by Aristotle, who inspired him with an interest in philosophy, medicine, and scientific investigation. But he was later to advance beyond his teacher's narrow precept that non-Greeks should be treated as slaves. Left in charge of Macedonia in 340 during Philip's attack on Byzantium, Alexander defeated the Maadi, a Thracian people. 2 years later, he commanded the left wing at the Battle of Chaeronea, in which Philip defeated the allied Greek states and displayed personal courage in breaking the sacred band of Thebes. An elite military corps composed of 150 pairs of lovers. A year later, Philip divorced Olympias, and after a quarrel at the feast held to celebrate his father's new marriage, Alexander and his mother fled to Epirus, and Alexander later went to Illyria. Shortly afterward, father and son were reconciled, and Alexander returned, but his position as heir was jeopardized. In 336, however, on Philip's assassination, Alexander, acclaimed by the army, succeeded without opposition. He had once executed the princess Lyncestis, alleged to be behind Philip's, along with all possible rivals and the whole of the faction opposed to him. He then marched south, recovering in wavering Thessaly and an assembly of the Greek League of Corinth was appointed generalissimo for the forthcoming invasion of Asia. Already planned and initiated by Philip, returning to Macedonia by way of Delphi, he advanced into Thrace in spring 335, and after forcing the Skipka pass and crushing the Trebali, crossed the Danube to disperse the Getae, turning west. He then defeated and shattered a coalition of Illyrians who had invaded Macedonia. Meanwhile, a rumor of his deletion had precipitated a revolt of Theban Democrats. So this is Alexander the Great. From his accession, Alexander had set his mind on a Persian expedition. He had grown up to the idea, moreover, he needed the wealth of Persia if he was to maintain the army built by Philip and pay off the 500 talents he owed. So, trying to see what is, so in other words, Alexander the Great. Okay, let me go ahead, instead of reading all that, let me see. Why was Alexander the Great famous? Although king of ancient Macedonia for less than 13 years, so in other words, he was the king of Macedonia. Alexander the Great changed the course of history. One of the world's greatest military generals, he created a vast empire that stretched from Macedonia to Egypt and from Greece to part of India. This allowed for Hellenistic culture to become widespread. So Hellenistic culture, let me see what they had at the bottom. It's just a whole lot to read, but I was just trying to get to the most important. Let me see if he had any quotes. Alexander the Great. So Alexander the Great, so in this the first paragraph, it doesn't say, well, he was the king. They said he was the king. And he was, fighting in different wars. He had generated his own army. But at the bottom, it did say, let me see if he have any quotes. Alexander the Great. But you can look up Alexander the Great, and because it says Alexander the Great, also known as Alexander the Third or Alexander of Macedonia, or it did say he overthrew the Persian Empire, carried Macedonian arms to India, and laid the foundations for the Hellenistic world of territorial kingdoms. Already in his lifetime, the subject of fabulous stories, he later became the hero of a full-scale legend bearing only the sketchiest resemblance to his historical career. So in other words, he overthrew the Persian Empire. Just imagine you're the king and you overthrow a whole empire. And so he became famous that way, and he laid the foundations for the Hellenistic world of territorial kingdoms. So let me see if Alexander the Great has any quotes. It should be. Look like everybody has some quotes. Alexander, Alexander. Let's see. Let me see if Alexander the Great has any quotes. Yes, I believe he do. Images of Alexander the Great. I think they have quotes from everybody. Alexander the Great, quote, through every generation of the human race, I'll have to click on this. Let's see. Let me see. Hold up. Okay, let me click on it. It says Alexander the Great, 25 famous quotes. In the end, when it's over, all that matters is what you've done. That's I can understand that. In the end, when it's over, all that matters is what you have done. Because if you live a life that you haven't done nothing, you haven't helped people, you haven't inspired nobody, you haven't done anything for yourself and your family, you haven't, yourself, first of all, you sit back your whole life and you didn't have any dreams and goals and aspirations. So, in the end, when it's over, all that matters is what you've done. Because in your lifetime, you don't want to look back and realize, what have I done in my life? I didn't go to school. I didn't have no kids. I didn't get married. I didn't help nobody. I didn't inspire nobody. So those are the things you think about before the time, because, but I'm not afraid of an army of lions led by sheep. I am afraid of an army of sheep led by a lion. I'm afraid, but see, he said he's not afraid of an army of lions that's led by sheep. So in other words, the lions led by sheep, that may be, I guess he figured on if you're led by sheep, things might be easier on you. But he's definitely afraid of an army of sheep led by a lion, because a lion is the most ferocious animal in the jungle. I'm afraid of an army of sheep that's led by a lion. So just imagine somebody being led by a lion, it's gonna come at you more harshly, So that's what it sounds like to me. Because if it's being led by a sheep, it might not have that, it might not have that force behind it, because the sheep may be lighter than a lion. And without knowledge, skill cannot be focused. Without skill, strength cannot be brought to bear, and without strength, knowledge may not be applied. So that's a good quote. Without knowledge, skill cannot be focused. So if you don't have the knowledge, right, you won't focus on that skill. And without skill, strength cannot be brought to bear, and without strength, knowledge may not be applied. So, yeah, if you don't have the strength, and to me, it seems like it says, without the strength, knowledge may not be applied. Without knowledge, skill cannot be focused. So in other words, I guess if you don't have, it says without knowledge, skill cannot be focused. In other words, if you don't have the knowledge, then you might not have that skill, for that particular, whatever, it is that you want to do. You might not have that skill, because you're basically, first of all, you don't have knowledge. So you gotta have knowledge to come, the knowledge and skill go together, and then, because you're not going to want to focus on anything if you don't have the skill, you don't have the knowledge. And without skill, strength cannot be brought to bear, and without strength, knowledge may not be applied. So, I mean, that's, you have to really sometimes you have to think. And sometimes I find I have to read, sometimes you have to read more than once, so you can kind of get the understanding. True love never has a happy ending, because there's no ending to true love. Excuse me. True love never has a happy ending. So this is Alexander the Great. So you can also read up on Alexander the Great. True love never has a happy ending, because there is no ending to true love. I mean, it should be, if it's true love, to me it seems like it still should be some type of ending. You can have true love, you can love, it doesn't say whether or not it is a female-male relationship. So, but it says true love never has a happy ending, because there's no ending to true love. True love, there's no ending. There's nothing impossible to him who would try. There's nothing impossible to him who would try. So nothing is impossible. I guess he feel, I don't want to say feel, but I guess he I guess he means there's nothing impossible to him who would try. In other words, if you try, there's nothing impossible. At least give it a try. Nothing is impossible. I mean, you might try something and you might fail. You might go back to the drawing board and try again. There's nothing impossible to him who would try. Nothing is impossible. In other words, I guess what he means is, there's nothing impossible. Try. If it's something that you want to do, you have your dreams, your goals, your aspirations, go ahead and at least try. At least try, Nothing beats a failure but a try. So there's nothing impossible to him who would try. It says, with the right attitude, self-imposed limitations vanish. With the right attitude, self-imposed limitations vanish. So in other words, if you have the right attitude and you determine, if you have the right attitude, you determine to do this or do that, and self-imposed limitations vanish. So in other words, you won't impose those limitations on yourself. They'll just vanish and go away because you have the right attitude. You have the right attitude. I can believe that one, because if you don't have the right attitude, and you be like, oh, what are you thinking? You say, hey, I want to go to school. I want to go to law school. I want to go to medical school. I want to go to business school. I really want to do it. I have the drive, the fortitude, the determination. That's the right attitude. I have that attitude. So there will be no self-imposed limitations because they're going to vanish. Because I have the right attitude. I have the determination. I have the drive. I'm going to put my foot down and do what I need to do. So with the right attitude, because it starts in the mind, you have to change your mindset. Change your mindset. You can't keep thinking. Now, if you think, oh, you know what, I'll never be this. I ain't gonna never be nothing in this world. I ain't never gonna have nothing. I'm gonna always be poor. Blah, blah, blah. That's not the right attitude. See, with that type of attitude, that is a different attitude from, I can do this. I'm gonna do this. I'm going to put my foot down. I'm gonna, put my money to the side. I'm gonna start my business. I'm gonna work this job, put my money to the side, start my business. I'm gonna do what I need to do. That's the right attitude. Don't have an attitude as though, oh, I ain't never gonna be nothing in life. I mean, I want to go to college, but I don't have no money. Blah, blah, all negativity. So in other words, he's saying, get those negative thoughts out of your mind. See, so negative thoughts, put some positive thoughts in your mind, and that gives you a right attitude. See, with the right attitude, self-imposed limitations. So you won't have if you have the right attitude, right, you won't have no limitations put on yourself. But if you come forward with the wrong attitude, you like, oh, I ain't gonna be this, I ain't this, and I ain't that. You starting out wrong already. And so just, try to have the right attitude. So that's what it seems like he's saying. Have the right attitude, because sometimes we mess ourselves up with the wrong attitude, thinking, I ain't going to get this job. I ain't going to pass this class. I'm not going, I'm not going to do this. I'm not, I ain't going to never be nothing. You can't have that type of attitude about yourself, because a lot of times when you speak those negative thoughts, then sometimes they come true. Think positive. I try to think positive, But truly, if I were not Alexander, I would be Diogenes. So Diogenes is a philosopher that I think I mentioned him in one of my other videos. See, so Alexander the Great says, but truly, if I were not Alexander the Great, I would be Diogenes. So in other words, he thought so highly of Diogenes that he said, look, if I wasn't Alexander the Great, I'd be Diogenes. So he must have been, to him, a great inspirational person to him. Every light is not the sun. Every light is not the sun. Let me see one last one. Let me see. He has a whole lot of them over here. Let me see. Okay. On their side, more men are standing. On ours, more will fight. On their side, more men are standing. On ours, more will fight. So on their side, more men are standing, but on our side, more will fight. So let me see. Let's go to, let me go over, I did Dred Scott, Harriet Beecher Stowe. Let's talk about, I want to talk about the Missouri Compromise. So a lot of these people that I bring forward, I think it's the last one that I would do off this, let me see, I don't know, let me see. Yeah, I think that one, I think that's the last one I would do on this page. Let me see the Missouri Compromise. Let me just read. SSOUR. Okay, the Missouri Compromise, just a little bit I want to. Missouri Compromise. Missouri Compromise. The measure worked out between the North and the South and passed by the U.S. Congress that allowed for admission of Missouri as a slave state, Maine as a free state, and made free soil all western territories north of Missouri, Missouri's southern border. It marked the beginning of the prolonged sectional conflict over the extension of slavery that led to the Civil War. It was repealed by the Kansas-Nebraska Act. They say it was repealed by the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 and declared unconstitutional in the Dred Scott decision of 1857. So I just went over the Dred Scott decision, how he was passed around from slave owner to slave owner, and then he was passed down from one of his slave owners' brother, passed down to him. And finally, it went to the Supreme Court, and he did become a free man. Okay, let me see. So the Missouri Compromise, they don't look like they. Let's see. They didn't give me a whole lot. Let me click on another one. Missouri Compromise, date definition 1820. So the Missouri Compromise. Okay. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 was a law. It was a law that tried to address growing sectional tensions over the issue of slavery. I already knew it had something to do with slavery. By passing the law, which President James Monroe signed, the U.S. Congress admitted Missouri to the Union as a state that allowed slavery. So they admitted it, Missouri. So the President of the U.S. Congress admitted Missouri to the Union as a state. Admitted Missouri to the Union as a state that allowed slavery. It says Congress admitted Missouri to the Union as a state that allowed slavery and Maine as a free state. It also banned slavery from the remaining Louisiana Purchase lands located north of the 36° 30 parallel. The Missouri Compromise will remain in force for just over 30 years before it was repealed by the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. In 1857, the Supreme Court ruled in the Dred Scott decision that the compromise was unconstitutional, setting the stage for the Civil War. Pro and anti-slavery factions in Congress When Missouri Territory first applied for statehood in 1818, it was clear that many in the territory wanted to allow slavery in the new state. They wanted slavery in the new state. Part of the more than 800,000 square miles bought from France in the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, Missouri was known as the Louisiana Territory until 1812, when it was renamed to avoid confusion with the newly admitted state of Louisiana. Missouri's bid to become the first state was west of the Mississippi River, and to allow slavery within its borders set off a bitter debate in a Congress that was like the nation itself, already divided into pro and anti-slavery factions. So the Missouri Compromise, let me see if I can pick out some important points. In the North, where abolitionist sentiment was growing, many people opposed the extension of the institution of slavery into new territory. So yeah, a lot of people opposed the institution of slavery, so they try to make it more widespread. See, many people oppose the extension of the institution of slavery into new territory and worried that adding Missouri as a slave state. So they wanted to add Missouri as a slave state. They wanted to expand the institution of slavery. Yeah, they wanted all these slaves, they working slaves, our ancestors working for, well, I don't know if I would call, it still was work. It was free labor, they weren't getting paid. They wasn't able to file taxes and work, they worked, but, working in cotton fields and worked inside the house, inside the slave owner's house. Pro-slavery Southerners, meanwhile, argued that new states like the original 13 should be given the freedom to choose whether to permit slavery or not. So they're saying that pro-slavery Southerners, meanwhile, argued that new states like the original 13 states should be given the freedom to choose whether or not they wanted slavery. Some states didn't want slavery and some states did. So after this stalemate, Missouri renewed its application for statehood in late 1819. This time, Speaker of the House Henry Clay proposed that Congress admit Missouri to the Union as a state that allows slavery. So they wanted to, the Speaker of the House, Henry Clay, proposed that Congress admit Missouri to the Union as a state that allows slavery. So like I said, they were trying to extend slavery into Missouri. Then it says in February 1820, the Senate added a second part to the joint statehood bill with the exception of Missouri. Slavery would be banned in all of the former Louisiana Purchase lands north of the 36 degree 30 latitude, which ran along Missouri's southern border. On March the 3rd, 1820, the House passed the Senate version of the bill, and President James Monroe signed it into law 4 days later. See what I'm saying? They had the president signing these bills, so slavery was written into law. Slavery was in the Constitution. The following month, the former President Thomas Jefferson wrote to a friend that the Missouri question, like a fire bell in the night, awakened and filled me with terror. I considered it at once as the nail of the Union. It is hushed indeed for the moment, but this is a reprieve only, not final sentence. The shortcomings of the Missouri Compromise. Though the Missouri Compromise managed to keep the peace for the moment, it failed to resolve the pressing question of slavery and its place in the nation's future. Southerners who opposed the Missouri Compromise did so because it set a precedent for Congress to make laws concerning slavery, while Northerners disliked the law because it meant slavery was expanded into new territory. So they were trying to expand slavery into new territories. In Missouri, the Missouri Compromise was trying to get everything settled, and they were trying to use it as you know, the precedent. Precedent is like that. Precedent is like the important. It's an important case or an important. It could be an important decision. So in other words, when you're ready to make, when the courts want to make another decision, they can look at that precedent case, that important case. In other words, if that case was settled and a decision was made, then they can use that case in another, you know, another case that may come up. They can use that, they call that precedent. Southerners who opposed the Missouri Compromise, it did so because it set a precedent for Congress to make laws concerning slavery. So it did set a precedent. So in the decades after 1820, as westward expansion continued and more of the Louisiana Purchase lands were organized as territories, the question of slavery's extension continued to divide the nation. The Compromise of 1850, which admitted California to the Union as a free state, required California to send one pro-slavery senator to maintain a balance of power in the Senate. Trying to get to the end because it's a lot to read. It says the 1860 Compromise that would have preserved slavery in the United States Constitution. The 1860 Compromise. Bitter controversy also surrounded the U.S. Supreme Court decision in Dred Scott versus Sanford. So I'm not going to go back over that part. That's the end of it. So let me click on, I want to click on the 1860 Compromise that would have preserved slavery in the United States Constitution. The 1860 Compromise that would have preserved slavery in the United States Constitution. Like I said, slavery was in the Constitution and they wanted to preserve it. Well, so it was a good thing that we had a lot of abolitionists like Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, John Brown, Harriet Tubman, Harriet Beecher Stowe. So it was a good thing that we had those abolitionists fighting for our, fighting to, for our freedoms, I would say, for our ancestors' freedom, over 300 something years ago. So it was a good thing, that, because it was, slavery was in the Constitution. So just imagine if, I tell you, I don't even want to think about if slavery, that type of slavery was still going on, would be something, so that's why it's definitely very important. February is very important to acknowledge Black History Month in February. It says, following Abraham Lincoln's victory in the 1860 presidential election, 11 southern states seceded from the Union. Slavery and states' rights had been at the center of the election. So Abraham Lincoln won his victory in 1860, and so they still were trying to dissolve this slavery, this institutional slavery, this fight to end slavery. It says slavery and the states' rights had been at the center of the election, and Lincoln had vowed during his campaign to not restrict slavery where it already existed, but to limit its expansion to the Western territory. So Abraham Lincoln wanted to limit the expansion of slavery. He didn't want it to go all into the Western territories. A series of concessions to the slaveholding southern states, from the Missouri Compromise in 1820 to the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, had helped manage sectional crisis and hold the Union together. Some lawmakers saw the prospect of another compromise as the nation's best bet for survival. So I don't want to read all this. Let me see. I try to pick out the most important points. It says John J. Crittenden, moderate Democrat and slaveholder, authors the plan. The Crittenden Compromise was the creation of John J. Crittenden, a 74-year-old slaveholder and Democratic senator from Kentucky, who, so in other words, he was a slave holder, and he was a Democratic senator. Ain't that something? Who emerged with a compromise that he claimed would end the arguments over slavery and avert a civil war between the North and the South. It would also guarantee the existence of slavery in the slave states by preserving it in the U.S. Constitution. Okay, I'm not going to read all of that. I think that's going to be it for the Missouri Compromise. So Abraham Lincoln in other words, the Missouri Compromise, they were trying to compromise and put an end. Some wanted to end slavery, some didn't want to end it, and they were trying to compromise. They didn't want slavery. Abraham Lincoln didn't want slavery to be extended into those states that didn't want to. Some states didn't want to deal with slavery, so they didn't want to make them, they didn't want to extend slavery into states, into the states where they didn't want slavery. In other words, it was already in certain states, so they figured, since it was in the Constitution, they didn't want to extend it. Some people didn't want to extend it to states that, states that didn't have slavery. Some people were not for slavery. So, and that was the Missouri Compromise. So, the Missouri Compromise, it seems to me that they had, mixed views. They had, you had some people wanted this and some people wanted that, different. So it says, what 3 things did the Missouri Compromise do? So before I close out, okay, it says Henry Clay then skillfully led the forces of compromise, engineering separate votes on a controversial measure. So it was just a big old controversial measure. On March the 3rd, 1820, the decisive votes in the House admitted Maine as a free state. So some states were already free. Some states that didn't have slaves, they were free. They were free states. And they wanted Missouri, they wanted to add Missouri as a slave state. So Missouri as a slave state, and made free soil all western territories north of Missouri's southern border. So it says, on March the 3rd, 1820, the decisive votes in the House admitted Maine as a free state, Missouri as a slave state. That's why they said the Missouri Compromise. I guess Missouri wanted, the state of Missouri, they wanted to own slaves, but they made Maine a free state, but Missouri was a slave state. And it made free soil all western territories north of Missouri. So all western territories north of Missouri, said it made free soil. So all states west of the Missouri border were free. They had free soil, so I guess they were free. It was a free state, with no slaves. So that's the Missouri Compromise. So if you want to, I guess that's why they said it was a compromise. In other words, they made Maine a free state, but they made Missouri a slave state. Excuse me. That's why they probably called it the Missouri Compromise, because they had a compromise, but they had so many controversial measures, controversial things, decisions, controversial, I guess it's a controversial views, I would say. They had so many controversial views. Or they made Maine a free state, and they made Missouri a slave state. and it made all Western territories north of Missouri, they had free soil, so they were free states. That was a free state. Free states, I guess, because it says all Western territories. So all those states that were west of Missouri, they had free soil. So I assume that means they didn't own slaves. They didn't own slaves, but they did make Missouri a slave state. Okay, I think I got one more. Let's look at the I want to look at the Declaration of Independence. Let me look at the Declaration of Independence. Kind of cold today. I went out earlier, so then every time I do my videos, then I start sneezing or coughing. So let's look into the Declaration of Independence and the signers of the Declaration of Independence. So hope you all are having a nice day so far today. So it's nighttime here. So let's see, the Declaration of Independence. Okay, the Declaration of Independence in U.S. history, a document that was approved by the Continental Congress on July the 4th, 1776. That's why we always celebrate the 4th of July. 1776, and that announced the separation of 13 North American British colonies from Great Britain. So they celebrated the separation of 13 North American British colonies from Great Britain. They wanted to separate from Great Britain. Like I said, I think I talked about the Declaration of Independence on one of my other videos, how Great Britain and the King, they didn't like, all the signers of the Declaration of Independence, they didn't like the views. They didn't like the way they were treated by the British government. So then they signed the Declaration of Independence, but it was later known to be an act of treason. And then all the families, them and their families, some of them were killed. And so I'm just reading over this again. Okay, it explains why the Congress on July 2nd, unanimously by the votes of 12 colonies, have resolved that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. Accordingly, the day on which final separation was officially voted was July the 2nd. Although the 4th, the day on which the Declaration of Independence was adopted, has always been celebrated in the United States as the great national holiday, the 4th of July or Independence Day. It says, look, accordingly, the day on which final separation was officially voted was July the 2nd. Although the 4th, the day on which the Declaration of Independence was adopted, so it was accordingly the day in which the separation was officially voted. So they voted on the 2nd, then they adopted it on the 4th. And the day on which the Declaration of Independence was adopted, it was adopted on the 4th, but they voted on it on the 2nd. Because it says that the 4th, although the 4th was the day that they adopted it, that's the day in which the Declaration was adopted. It has always been celebrated in the United States as a great national holiday. It says on April 19, 1775, when battles of Lexington and Concord initiated armed conflict between Britain and the 13 colonies, the Americans claimed that they sought only their rights within the British Empire. At that time, few of the colonists consciously desired to separate from Britain. As the American Revolution proceeded during 1775 and 1776, and Britain overtook to desert its sovereignty by means of large armed forces, making only a gesture toward conciliation, the majority of Americans increasingly came to believe that they must secure their rights outside the empire. The losses and restrictions that came from the war greatly weakened the breach between the colonies and the mother country. Moreover, it was necessary to assert independence in order to secure as much French aid as possible. So it was necessary to assert independence in order to secure as much French aid as possible. So they were trying to get that aid, trying to get the funding, you know. Let me see. Trying to find the most important part of it. Okay, here we go. The signers of the Declaration of Independence were as follows. We have John Hancock, he was the president. Samuel Adams, John Adams, Robert Treat Paine, and Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts, Button Gwinnett, Lyman Hall, and George Walton of Georgia, William Hooper, Joseph Hughes, and John Penn of North Carolina, Edward Rutledge, Thomas Hayward, Junior Thomas Lynch, Jr. and Arthur Middleton of South Carolina, Samuel Chase, William Packer, Thomas Stone, Charles Kemp. It's a whole lot of them. I'm not going to read all these names. Wow, all these people signed? It said the signers were as follows. Well, we know John Hancock, that's what they always say, you know, when you had to do something, you had to put your signature on a document or something, on a document. They might say, hey, put your John Hancock on here, but there's so many other names on here besides John Hancock. John Hancock was the president. Then we had Samuel Adams, John Adams, Robert Treat Paine. Let me see if I can recognize any other names. I know John Hancock. I know Thomas Jefferson. Oh, okay, there you go right there. Thomas Jefferson. There were so many of them. Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, John Hancock, Samuel Adams. The rest of these names I don't even recognize. And Matthew Thornton of New Hampshire. Oh, these are all the senators. Stephen Hopkins and William Ellery of Rhode Island. Okay, those are the only names I can recognize. Thomas McKean of Delaware. Yeah, so the only one I really recognize is John Hancock, Samuel Adams. Thomas Jefferson. And, okay, yeah, Benjamin Franklin. I see him on here. And the last signer was Thomas McKean of Delaware, whose name was not placed on the document before 1777. And it is so many. Okay, so that's the Declaration of Independence. Okay, let me do one more thing. I think that's the last. I think that was the last. Was it hard? I typed in, was it hard for the signers of the Declaration of Independence? I want to see. It says dangerous. Signing this document was dangerous. To sign the Declaration of Independence meant that the signers were living on borrowed time. But freedom meant sacrifice, even the sacrifice of their lives. So even with the threat of death, and even with the threat of blank hanging over their heads, they signed this marvelous and bold document. Signing this document was dangerous. Why was it dangerous? Because they said it was an act of treason, you know. They didn't like, the British government. They didn't like a lot of things. They didn't like the way the British government, was treating the people. So, was it dangerous to sign the Declaration of Independence? What happened to the men who signed the Declaration of Independence? It says, of 56 men who signed the Declaration, 12 fought in battles as members of state militias, 5 were captured and imprisoned during the Revolutionary War, 17 lost property as a result of British raids, and 5 lost their fortunes in helping fund the Continental Army and state militias battle the Redcoats. So, of the 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence, 12 fought in battles as members of state militias, 5 were captured and imprisoned. So, because it was said to be an act of treason. So 5 of them were captured and imprisoned during the Revolutionary War, and 17 lost property as a result of British raids, and 5 lost their fortunes. Some of them lost their money. Let me see. So that's the Declaration of Independence. There's a whole lot of signers. The sacrifices made by the men who signed the Declaration of Independence. It says, when reading the Declaration of Independence, it's easy to focus only on the sweeping language of the second paragraph and skip over the names and mutual pledge of the signers as its conclusion. It says, principles need to be enforced by individuals who have the habits of character necessary to fight for them, and perhaps even die for them, if need be. In a time where talk of rights dominate our political discourse, a focus on duties is dispensable in order to teach citizens the responsibilities they owe toward each other and their posterity. So I'm not going to read all this. So that's the Declaration of Independence. So like I said, it was considered to be an act of treason, and you know, some of them were killed, some of their families were killed, and some of them lost a lot of money. And it was just, you know, it was dangerous to sign the Declaration of Independence. So that's what happened. So you can read more on the Declaration of Independence. And then I have, let me see what time I'm working with. Okay, so that's an hour. I have a few more minutes. So let me read a little bit about Henry David Thoreau. Walt Whitman, and who else I have on here? And Napoleon. So Henry David Thoreau, let me breeze through a couple of these. So Henry David Thoreau, and then so Henry David Thoreau, his Walden on Walden Pond. Henry David Thoreau, you know what? In this book right here, this is where I got Henry David Thoreau out of this book right here. So he came out of this book, so this is a reading. Well, you can't see it, but that's so Henry David Thoreau. So Henry David Thoreau was born July the 12th, 1817. 1817, Concord, Massachusetts. Died May the 6th, 1862. He was an American essayist, poet, and practical philosopher, renowned for having lived the doctrines of transcendentalism, as recorded in his masterwork, Walden, 1854, and for having been a vigorous advocate of civil liberties, as evidenced in the essay Civil Disobedience. So Thoreau was born 1817 in Concord, Massachusetts, the third child of a feckless small businessman named John Thoreau and his bustling wife, Cynthia Dunbar Thoreau. Though his family moved the following year, they returned in 1823. Even he grew ambivalent about the village after reaching adulthood. He never grew ambivalent about his lovely setting of woodlands, streams, and meadows. So he was fascinated with the woodlands, the streams, and the meadows. In 1828, his parents sent him to Concord Academy, where he impressed his teachers and so was permitted to prepare for college. So he impressed his teachers, got prepared for college. Upon graduating from the academy, he entered Harvard University. So I know it's probably changed, probably some changes now, but I wonder if that's the same Harvard, that they have now. He entered Harvard University in 1833. Well, that was so many years ago, but I guess the name, still lives on. There was a good student, but he was a good student, but he was indifferent to the rank system and preferred to use the school library for his own purposes. Graduating in the middle ranks of the class of 1837, Thoreau searched for a teaching job and secured one at his old grammar school in Concord. He found that he was no disciplinarian and resigned after 2 shaky weeks. Ain't that something? After he worked for his father in the family pencil making business in June 1838, he started a small school with the help of his brother John. Despite his progressive nature, it lasted for 3 years until John fell ill. So I'm not going to read everything, but let me see. Let me get some more stuff. Literary career. So it says in 1840, Henry David Thoreau fell in love with and proposed marriage to an attractive visitor to Concord named Ellen Sewall. She accepted his proposal, but then immediately broke off the engagement at the insistence of her parents. He remained a bachelor for life. During 2 periods, 1841 and 1843 to 1843 and 1847 to 1848, he stayed mostly at the Emerson's house. In spite of Emerson's hospitality and friendship, however, Thoreau grew restless. His condition was accentuated by grief over the death of his brother John, who tetanus in January 1841 after cutting his finger. After that year, Thoreau became a tutor in the Staten Island household of Emerson's brother William while trying to cultivate the New York literary market. Thoreau's literary activities went indifferently. However, in the effort to conquer New York failed. Confirmed in his distaste for city life and disappointed by his lack of success, he returned to Concord in late 1843. So let me, hold up. This is Henry David Thoreau. This is Henry David Thoreau. So that is Henry David Thoreau. So that's Henry David Thoreau on Walden Pond. I did some research on him previously, how he said he wanted to be one with nature. He wanted to suck all the marrow out of life. He wanted to back life into a corner. But I wanted to see if it was any more information online that I didn't get from the book. So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do some more research and see what else they had to say about Henry David Thoreau, because I do have a reading in my book. Henry David Thoreau, from Thoreau's Walden. And let me see if he said it in here. It's talking about how he was friends with Ralph Waldo Emerson. So Henry David Thoreau, he was friends with Ralph Waldo Emerson. It said friendship with Emerson. Ralph Waldo Emerson settled in Concord during Thoreau's sophomore year at Harvard and by the autumn of 1837, they were becoming friends. Emerson sensed in Thoreau a true disciple, that is, one with so much Emersonian self-reliance that he would still be his own man. Thoreau saw in Emerson a guide, a father, and a friend. And so they became friends. They talk about the career. It says, as the 1840s began, Thoreau formally took up the profession of poet. Captioned by Emerson, the Transcendentalist started a magazine, The Dial. Its inaugural issue, dated July 1840, carried Thoreau's poem Sympathy and his essay on the Roman poet Aulus Persius Flaccus. The Dial published more of Thoreau's poem, and then in July 1842, the first of his outdoor essays, Natural History of Massachusetts. Though discussed as a book review, it showed that a nature writer of distinction was in the making. Then followed more lyrics and fine ones, such as To the Maiden in the East, and another nature essay, remarkably felicitous. A Winter Walk. The Dial seized publication with the April 1844 issue, having published a richer variety of Thoreau's writing, Henry David Thoreau's writing, than any other magazine ever would. So it said Thoreau fell in love with and proposed marriage to an attractive visitor to Concord named Ellen Sewell. I already read that part. They put that back up there again. See, here it is right here. This is a passage in the book. Moved to Walden Pond of Henry David Thoreau. So you can read more about Henry David Thoreau. He went down to the pond, not too far from where he lived. He wanted to build a house. He took his axe with him, and he wanted to go down there. He wanted to see if he could not learn what the environment around him had to teach. It says, back in Concord, Thoreau rejoined his family's business, making pencils and grinding graphite. By early 1845, he felt more restless than ever until he decided to take up an idea of a Harvard classmate who had once built a waterside hut in which one could read and contemplate. In the spring, Thoreau picked a spot by Walden Pond, a small glacial lake located 2 miles south of Concord on land Emerson owned. Early in the spring of 1845, Thoreau, then 27 years old, began to chop down tall pines with which to build the foundations of his home on the shores of Walden Pond. From the outset, the move gave him profound satisfaction. Once settled, he restricted his diet for the most part to the fruits and vegetables he found growing wild and the beans he planted. So he went down there, to the pond, and he restricted his food intake. See, he restricted his food intake. He said once settled, once settled, he restricted his diet for the most part to fruits and vegetables. Fruits and vegetables he found growing wild, and the beans he planted. So he planted beans, he ate the beans down there, fruits and vegetables. When not busy weeding his bean rows and trying to protect them from hungry groundhogs or occupied with fishing, swimming, or rowing, he spent long hours observing and recording the local flora and fauna, reading and writing A Week on the Concord and Mary Mac Rivers, 1849. He also made entries in his journals. So in other words, he was down there on Walden Pond, not eating a whole lot. See if he could, I guess he was seeing if he could survive with, not all the essentials, it took some of the essentials of life, and he wanted to see if he could, survive down there on Walden Pond. So he was documenting everything, writing in his journal while he was down there. It says he also made entries in his journal, which he later polished and included in Walden, which much time too was spent in meditation. So he was down there meditating, writing in his journal, eating less, not eating that much. It says out of such activity and thought came Walden, a series of 18 essays describing Thoreau's experiment in basic living, and his effort to set his time free for leisure. So in other words, he went down on Walden Pond. It was an experiment in basic living. He wanted to see, I guess, if he could live without the essentials in life. And it says several other essays provided his original perspective on the meaning of work and leisure, and described his experiment in living as simply and self-sufficiently as possible. So he wanted to live easy, simple, and self-sufficient. Nothing coming from no one else, you know. You go to the grocery store, you get your food, or you do this and you do that. He was trying to live the simple life. And it says, as simply and self-sufficiently as possible. That's how he wanted to live. While in others, Thoreau described the various realities of life at Walden Pond. So, life at Walden Pond, his intimacy with the small animals he came in contact with. So, he came in contact with small animals. He paid attention to their sounds, the smells, and then the look of the woods and the water at various seasons. So he observed the waters and he observed the woods and the water at various seasons. The music of wind and telegraph wires, in short, the felicities of learning how to fulfill his desire to live as simply and self-sufficiently as possible. So he went down to Walden Pond to try to live as simple and self-sufficiently as possible, without no help from nobody else. Taking notice of the little insects and the woods, just looking at the woods, the water, observing his surroundings. It says the physical act of living day by day at Walden Pond is what gives the book authority. So in other words, he went down there for that experiment, then he wrote a book about it. So that's good. That's a good idea. The physical act of living day to day by Walden Pond is what gives the book authority. While Thoreau's command of a clear, straightforward, elegant style helped raise it to the level of literary classic. Thoreau stayed down on Walden Pond for 2 years. Just imagine, you stand down, you go down to the woods, and you looking at all the little, your animals down, not the animals, the little insects. You observing the ground, the grass, the trees, and you stay down there for 2 years just to, for an experiment, trying to live the simple life, and then, write a book about it. In the summer of 1847, Emerson invited him to stay with his wife and children again, while Emerson himself went to Europe. Thoreau accepted, and in September 1847, he left his cabin forever. It says, midway in his Walden sojourn, Thoreau had spent a night in jail. On an evening in July 1846, he encountered Sam Staples, the constable and tax gatherer. Staples asked him amiably to pay his poll tax, which Thoreau had omitted paying for several years. He declined, and Staples locked him up. So this is getting into something else, so that's it. So I just wanted to read a little bit. I wanted to see what the internet had on him. So in my book it says, from Thoreau's Walden, near the end of March 1845, he said, this is Henry David Thoreau. He said, I borrowed an axe and went down to the woods of Walden Pond, nearest to where I intended to build my house, and began to cut down some tall, arrowy, it's hard to say that word, arrowy white pines still in their youth for timber. It was a pleasant hillside where I worked covered with pine woods, through which I looked out on the pond and a small open field in the woods where pines and hickories were springing up. It says the ice in the pond was not yet dissolved, though there were some open spaces and it was all dark colored and saturated with water. There were some slight flurries of snow during the days that I worked there, but for the most part, when I came out on the railroad on my way home, its yellow sand heap stretched away, gleaming in the hazy atmosphere, and the rails shone in the spring sun and I heard the lark and peewee and other birds already come to commence another year with us. They were pleasant spring days in which the winter of man's discontent was thawing as well as the earth, and the life that had lain torpid began to stretch itself. One day when my axe had come off and I had cut a green hickory for a wedge, driving it with a stone, and had placed the hole to soak in a pond hole in order to swell the wood. I saw a striped snake run in the water, and he lay on the bottom. So this is Henry David Thoreau just explaining what he did, I guess, once he got down. Before he got down, to the pond, and once he arrived, at the pond. It says, he said he saw a striped snake run in the water, and he lay on the bottom, apparently without inconvenience as long as he stayed there. He said, or more than a quarter of an hour, perhaps because he had not yet fairly come out of the torpid state. It appeared to me that for a like reason, men remain in their present low and primitive condition. So he goes into talking about men, but he was observing this snake down at the pond that he went to. It says, but if they should feel the influence of the spring of springs arousing them, they will of necessity rise to a higher and more ethereal life. I had previously seen the snakes in frosty mornings in my path with portions of their bodies still numb and inflexible. So in other words, he saw these snakes before the sun came out. It was cold, and in other words, he saw them, and they still looked like they was frosty and frozen. Once the sun came out, then they were able to move around a little bit more. And it says I had previously seen the snakes in frosty mornings in my path with portions of their bodies still numb and inflexible. It said waiting for the sun to thaw them out. So when he first looked at them, they looked like they was frozen. They were waiting for the sun to thaw them out. He talked about the snakes down in the pond. On the 1st of April, it rained and melted the ice, and in the early part of the day, which was very foggy, I heard a stray goose groping about over the pond and crackling as if lost, or like the spirit of the fog. He said, now this is Henry David Thoreau, so I read some of it from the computer. Now this is a passage in a book. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach. He wanted to go down to the pond, wanted to live a simple life, he wanted to learn what it did not have to teach him. She says, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life. So he wanted to confront only the essential facts of life. He didn't want all, when you're in your house, you have access to, more than the simple things, but he wanted to go down there and confront the simple things in life. He said, I went to the woods. I wish to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and to see if I could not learn what it had to teach. And that, when it came to die, I discovered that I had not lived. I did not wish to live what was not life. Living is so dear, nor did I wish to practice resignation unless it was quite necessary. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life. He wanted to live deep in the woods, suck all the marrow out of life, live a simple life. He down in the woods and he see the snakes and stuff down in there. Oh no. He said he wanted to live sturdily and Spartan-like as to put to rout all that was not life, to cut a broad swath and shave close, to drive life into a corner. He wanted to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms. He wanted to drive life into a corner, reduce life to its lowest terms, and if it proved to be mean, and he wanted to see if it proved to be mean. Why then to get the whole and genuine meanness of it and publish its meanness to the world? In other words, like I read on the computer, he went down to the pond. A friend of his. He made friends with Ralph Waldo Emerson. They were friends. So he went down to his pond, according to the computer, went down to his pond, and he wanted just to confront the simple things in life. He wanted to live Spartan-like. He wanted to suck all the marrow out of life. He wanted to back life into a corner. Now, I love to hear that. But this is so fascinating to me. When I learned about this in Strayer University, it was so fascinating. I said, wow. And I never heard of any, I have never read about, never learned any other philosophers, doing anything like this, like Henry David Thoreau. Not that it's a good thing to do. This day and time, it would not be a good thing to do. So he wanted to live deep and suck all the marrow out of life, to live so sturdily and Spartan-like as to put to rout all that was not life. He wanted to cut a broad swath and shave close to drive life into a corner. He wanted to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms. And if it proved to be mean, why then to get the whole and genuine meanness of it and publish its meanness to the world? Or if it were sublimity, to know it by experience and be able to give a true account of it in my next excursion. So he wanted to know it by experience, give it, in other words, know it by experience, put it in a book, publish it to the world. So that's what he was saying. He said to know it by experience, be able to give a true account. He wanted to be able to give a true account. That's why he wanted to. So it reminds me of, a term that we learned is, qualitative research. So we have quantitative research, we have qualitative research. So qualitative means you go down. Qualitative research means you go down in the field. It's called field research. So that's really what he did. That was qualitative research. You go down to the field, go down in the field and do your research, but you can also, if you have participants, you can interview them, and that's, for your research, you write your book or whatever. So this is something like qualitative research. So for most men, he said, for most men, it appears to me, are in a strange uncertainty about it, whether it is the devil or of God, and have somewhat hastily concluded that it is the chief end of man here to glorify God and enjoy him forever. Simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. I say, let your affairs be as 2 or 3, and not 100 or 1,000. Instead of 1,000,000, count half a dozen, and keep your accounts on your thumbnail. Instead of 3 meals a day, if it be necessary, eat but one. So instead of 3 meals a day, eat 1 meal a day. Instead of 100 dishes, 5, and reduce other things in proportion. The indescribable innocence and beneficence of nature, of sun and wind and rain, of summer and winter, such health, such cheer, they afford forever, and such sympathy have they ever with our race, that all nature would be affected, and the sun's brightness fade, and the winds would sigh humanly, and the clouds rain tears, and the woods shed their leaves and put on mourning in this summer. If any man should ever for a just cause grieve, shall I not have intelligence with the earth? Am I not partly leaves and vegetables? Am I not partly leaves and vegetable mold myself? So in other words, I guess he felt that he wanted to be one with nature. So he's down in the woods, he's around the trees and the grass, the trees. So he said, am I not partly leaves and vegetable mold myself? So we're partly water. I think we are more water. Our bodies are made up of more water, but we have to do some more research on that. And am I not partly leaves and vegetable mold myself? So this was very fascinating. So I was so glad I did keep this book right here, Henry David Thoreau, so you can read more on him. And so this came from my book, The Humanistic Tradition. But you can read more on, I went over slavery, a little bit more about slavery today and yesterday, so I'll be moving on to different topics. But you can read more up on Henry David Thoreau, you know, different ones, John Locke, Descartes, or Plato, Socrates, any one of those I discussed. But I'll be bringing up a whole lot more, you know, because I want to learn about some, I guess I would say I want to do some research on some other philosophers that I haven't learned about. So it's always good to learn something new. But so I want to say thanks for joining me. Glad you could be here. Glad to see you. Glad you could join me. So hit the subscribe button if you can, and I will try to bring. I ain't gonna say try. I'm gonna say I will, because my teacher always said, don't say I'll, don't say ain't, and don't say I will try. You know, just do it. I will bring you some enlightening, inspirational, educational content for my channel. So I have 3 channels here on YouTube, and I'm concentrating on, you know, building 3. So however long it takes, you know, it takes time. I know I have so many people in my memory, and then one, you know, other ones that I want to bring forward. You know, I want to, you know, do some research on some that I haven't, you know, that I have no knowledge about, I have never heard of. I want to find, you know, and then, you know, different law terms, anything concerning business, definitely business, law, accounting, you know, philosophers, painters, artists. So I want to say thanks for joining me, and I'm going to end on that note, because I know it should be almost, it may be almost 2 hours, so glad to see you, glad you can join me, and come back to my video. I'll see you on my next video. So have a blessed one.